Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 274. Today's episode, I am interviewing a phenomenal leader, and she has had such an incredible journey throughout her career. And I think if you just looked at her name on paper, she's the Chief Customer Success Officer at Intuit. And that in and of itself would sound really powerful. But inside this interview, you really get to hear about her career journey and how she basically transitioned from being a data analyst into marketing, into operations, into the C-suite over the last 20 years at the same exact company. And this is a profound accomplishment. If you're somebody who has ever tried to rewrite your story of executive leadership to either transition into another field or even to move from director to vice president and really show them that you can be that leader at the next level, you know how difficult it can be to share that story and to connect those dots for the leaders around you. And Sarah has done that in such a beautiful, magnificent way. So this is a celebration, a testament to her. And also, I want you to hear it as an opportunity for yourself and thinking about your own career journey and some of the self-imposed limitations that maybe you've put into place for yourself. So let's just get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out, because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. My circle of friends is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in that every client that I touch is then touched by another brilliant and amazing leader. And then they're all coming back to me threefold. And the amazing, incredible leader that we have on today's podcast was actually sent to me by a dear friend and client that I guess the best way to describe it is I knew her when her youngest was a baby and she's no longer a baby anymore. So this is a really wonderful full circle moment. And then I'm just always really thrilled to meet other leaders that other people admire. And so it's like, what is that special sauce that makes you a great leader? And not to embarrass Sarah going into this conversation, but there is something about her leadership that deserves to be celebrated and then also can help you as my listener as we begin to think about our own career journey. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for the privilege of being able to share some of my story. I'm really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Well, let me give a formal introduction and then we'll just dive right in. Sarah Kim is the Chief Customer Success Officer for Intuit. She leads the global customer success organization and is responsible for connecting customers to Intuit's human experts, all enabled by the company's AI-driven expert strategy. Sarah has been with Intuit since 2006 and has held leadership roles across marketing, data and analytics, operations, and customer success. Wow, we have a lot to talk about, but let's start. So you work in customer success, but I want to hear about your secrets to success. So tell me, how did you get so successful?
Well, I think as we all learn over time and in our lives, success is defined by the conditions of optimization of how you define what your success looks like to begin with. And I think that's been a leadership journey for me as well as a personal journey. But I will just say, I think it's even in the most recent 2 years that I've taken on this new role as Intuit's Chief Customer Success Officer, one of the things that has remained true in terms of what I believe has helped guide me is really being true to my own integrity in terms of making sure the things that I believe are my strengths are really showing up and that I'm advocating for myself. And I think that's important. I never learned this lesson more over the last 12 years as I had my first daughter. And I think as you learn and as you observe the leaders on your team, as well as the the kids that some of you parents might have, I think you realize how important it is to have a voice and to have your voice be heard. So that's one really important tenet.
Yeah. Well, we'll dive into this a little bit more, but I can't help but notice your accent. I actually just like went into your LinkedIn profile. I was like, this girl ain't from Southern California. I am from Kentucky. So are you actually from Virginia originally or like
No, actually, I have a very interesting background. I am one of three. My parents are first generation from Seoul, South Korea, but I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina.
oh my
Uh,
God, I love it.
Amazing upbringing and hometown in its bubble, but presented itself with a lot of interesting
Right.
times for an Asian family during that time. And there were a lot of experiences I had that have really shaped how I've thought about not only my leadership, but how I think about the way I live my life and
Yeah.
experience I've had there.
Wow, that is so I'm so thankful that I asked this question because I had this little sensor in my head that said, don't ask her about her accent," even though what I'm coming at it from is huge amounts of endearment and, like, listening to you, Sarah, I'm like, "Wow, she has a story to tell." So, if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey to success. Did you always wanna be in the C-suite? You uncovered yourself along the way, but I think especially when you're not surrounded by people who this is what I say, who don't look, think, act, and talk like we do, then, it can be like there's a little second guessing along the way and trying to find ourselves and all the other fun things that come along with leadership.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I will say, I'm gonna date myself here, but in the mid 70s, I think it was a really tough time to grow up in the Southeast, particularly for an immigrant family coming into a community that was very homogenous. So I couldn't see myself. I think my sister, brother, and I, even though all year apart, 1 year apart, we were part of a high school where we were one of two minority families, really, in our high school of 1,200. So very small community. We couldn't see ourselves, in terms of people that look like us being so had that balance of being a novelty and also someone very different that people didn't understand. So I learned very early in my formidable years. Unfortunately, the learning for me was to not stand out, try to
Mhm.
almost be like others. And so as I got out of that mold and got into my career, got into secondary education and into college, I recognized that that wasn't working for me.
Thank God.
Yes.
I mean, like, you discovered this in college, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, "Oh, please."
A female in a minority situation in terms of technology company or where
Mhm.
it's very obvious, or you're in a minority group. I think sometimes it is very hard to not think about being the model citizen and to acclimate to what is around you. And I think what we really are trying to learn as leaders is how we actually embrace what's unique and capitalize on our strengths and appreciate the differences. And I think that really has shaped growing up in that very homogenous environment where you feel different, but you don't see yourself and learning how important it is to have your own identity and speak your
Yeah.
really shows up in the workplace today.
Mhm, mhm.
No longer is anything a meritocracy. It's about how you are advocating for yourself and
Yeah.
paving your own way.
Right, right. Yeah, that's so good. And it's like in some ways we don't have a choice and also it becomes our gift at the end of the day and you've been able to work with that. Now, speaking of technology and Intuit is a technology company, right? How do you navigate, as both a leader and internally in the company different changes in technology? What are some of the ways that you've been able to bring customer success to the next level using that? I mean, assuming that you're surrounded by other experts, there's always going to be those people on our team that know more than us that we can rely on and things like that. So, how have you been able to develop your own expertise in that area working for a company that's so predominantly tech heavy and also navigate the changes along the way?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I think it's very important when you are someone, especially, it's not as common to see people 19 years in a company reinvented itself every 3 to 5 years. And
Oh,
particularly,
yeah, you're saying the company has
yeah,
reinvented itself. So you've been there 19 years. The company has been through multiple changes over the years.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I've
I'm
been
just spelling that out in case you all missed it. And now I'm gonna start talking like you.
there.
Like I take on the Southern accent every time I talk to my mom.
I don't even recognize it anymore, but
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
the company is 44 years old, so almost half the life of the company. But the point I was trying to make is I truly believe another secret to my success has been always being curious about what's out there. You see most of folks moving companies within 2 to 3 years and thinking
Mhm.
5 year itch. I need to go to explore, grow, get bigger, know more, learn. But I have found that ability to do that within Intuit. I've had 11 different jobs, really leverage the skills that I have as a leader across multiple disciplines. And I think not only has that kept me current, but you also have to build a strong bench of talent around you to create that perfect recipe of a strong leadership culture and team. One aspect of that, I think, is always never resting on your laurels, are to disrupt the way current things work today when you connect people to expertise, particularly in technology that's very manual, very hard to understand, like, how do I go to get the best expertise when it comes to compliance driven events like your taxes? We've leveraged technology in our AI expert driven platform and our strategy to do that. But I didn't come with being an engineer or understand
Right, exactly.
AI. And
Yeah, so you just wanted to make everything difficult for yourself, right? Like, it's like, "I'm gonna do the hardest possible thing." It's so admirable. I love it.
well, and then you have to have an environment where you feel like you can succeed. And so
Mhm.
making sure that the role that you play is always bigger than the job that you have, I think is another tenet of something
Mm.
I found made many of our leaders very successful, including myself, which is the core of that is never suffering in silence if you don't know something and how you go teach
Mhm.
yourself and learn. And I
Mm.
think
Mhm.
you have to go outside your company sometimes to do that when you're on the cutting edge of innovation.
Right. So, tell me again your quote.
We should all think of as leaders about playing a much larger role than what
Then our job title, right? Yeah, okay.
sometimes I've said in the past to some of the leaders I've talked to who have asked, how did you get into customer success having started your career in marketing or as an analyst?
Right.
And many times I've felt like a square peg in a round hole in terms of the skills I have for the craft that I'm going to. And so that was a little bit of why I say, whatever your job description is on paper, the reality is that you could do much more than what, and you shouldn't constrain yourself to thinking I'm just a marketing analyst. You're in an organization of marketing as one example where there are many other crafts within that ecosystem. So that would be an example of how I took being a data analyst at Intuit as my first job and becoming, a marketer and then managing products. Then of course, managing operations. And so it always pays off to be curious and to think bigger than what's on paper in terms of your job description.
Yeah. You're talking a lot about like this idea of reinvention and being yourself and finding your path and all of this. And I'm wondering, was it always easy? Because there's this idea that it's like, if you just stay focused, stay in your lane, keep pushing, you can go, 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 go. And I'm curious from you, like any hurdles along the way, any ways that maybe perhaps you surprised yourself in your own career journey.
I would say, even joining into it within my first 8 months, one of the things I reflected on in the work that you're doing, that you've inspired many of us on around not seeing setbacks as a failure and learning from those. I probably am the poster child for that. Within the first 8 months that I joined into it, I had come from early career, very successful time at Capital One in financial services. And I came into it thinking, I've been in this very big job in the past. I could be very successful here. And then within the first 8 months, after having delivered really great, amazing business results, I had a team that was damaged, broken, and nowhere
Mm.
behind me when I look back. And so in my first 8 months here, I went to my first performance review. I'm thinking it was going to be a great, great outcome, great message, and end up getting demoted, actually.
Oh,
So you
wow.
say,
Thank
okay,
you for sharing. I was curious. I said, this can't have always been rosy.
yeah, well, then, and at that time, it's a great inflection point. You're like, I'm only 8 months into this company. They're telling me that I didn't do something right. It's nothing I had seen before. And so you can either take that moment and learn from it, or you can give up. At
Mhm.
that point for me is when, that true reflection of looking back and saying, how can I learn from this? And
Right.
me, that's where my philosophy around servant leadership really came from. I mean, if I really am honest, delivering the outcomes wasn't the only way to get a great review. The team that I led at the time I thought we would be celebrating that we all won in terms of our business results. But being a leader means much more than that. And my personal journey
Mhm.
was that I wasn't the best leader I could be. I wasn't taking
Mhm.
the team first. And so that would be a great example of a step back, which I learned from, very early at Intuit. 19 years later, I'm in an amazing job and role to be able to run the company with esteemed peers, but I could only have gotten there and here with the opportunity to learn from my failures.
Yeah, and at least they gave you that space, it sounds like, to then be able to explore that and see what's next and to own it. That says a lot about their culture. I'm curious from you in terms of this idea of reinvention. So there's a couple of things that just on paper that happened in your career. One thing that's really obvious to me in terms of my clients is whenever anyone has been at a company for 20 years, you have to shift the narrative around you. And so we know that what got us here won't get us there. So we have the one, which is the growth. You get into higher levels of leadership. C suite is different than VP, is different than director, is different than marketing, is different than, right? And so it's like you've got a subject matter expertise shift in at the same time as the title changes, at the same time as being at the same company. And people can tend to pigeonhole us and to say, hey, you're that person, or you're not ready for that yet. So, what were some of the pivots that you had to do personally, or maybe even some of the things that you had to let go of, as you continue to grow?
Well, one, it really resonates with me when you think about being somewhere so long, even as a high performer or somebody who's really trusted or respected for a specific craft, you can often get pigeonholed, like you said. Our analytics leader on our consumer business for over 7 years and was very well respected for leading decisions as support
Hmm.
for data. And so when I had the opportunity to change crafts into a different area like customer success at the time, there are a lot of inertia around people believing that you could actually transform your leadership in a different
Hmm.
craft that you didn't grow up in. And so for me, this starts with you believing and being confident in your skills and in your ability to grow and always being curious and demonstrating. Because if you don't own your own development, I believe, as an example, just getting the interview for the VP
Hmm.
customer success in 2017 was me actually going outside of my manager to actually talk to other me and mentor me. It's very important that you have
Yeah.
advocacy and you don't
Hmm.
believe that it's just through your direct leader to not only, get input on what it would take to go bigger, to be at the next level, but also in a different craft, but also feel confident in myself that I knew
Hmm.
uh, that I could do it. Right. And so I think a lot of it comes within your own self, believing in yourself. Like in my case, and not only did I go through an interview process for it, but I don't think I was the obvious choice. And the reason I know that is because we ended up hiring the top candidate as well as myself into the role. And, less than a year later, they consolidated to one role and said, we believe you can do this much bigger job than even what you interviewed for. I don't believe I would have gotten that if I hadn't pushed for myself because it would have been very easy for the company to go outside for a leader who was in the craft for 10 years, who had proven transformation. But I had, even after the interview, set up time with hiring manager at the time and said, I want to tell you why I believe I'll be great for this job. I
Yeah.
want to say I
Oh,
think that made the difference, but
yeah, it's part of it, right?
yeah.
And then, so speaking of helpers along the way and our advocates, the people that we have around us, because it's one thing to keep saying, I'm ready. But unless you have that advocate in the other department who actually agrees with you. So, who were some of your mentors and how did you build allies along the way? What was your process?
As I mentioned before, I think throughout my whole career at Intuit, Deb Liu wrote a book about Take Back My Power
Yeah.
for esteemed board members. One of the things out of that book that I thought that really resonated with me was this idea of sponsorship and mentorship. At Intuit, I've been very fortunate from the very early days of joining the company of having a sponsorship from several
Mhm.
really great leaders, some that were my direct manager and some that were not. Dan Maurer, who was my first boss at Intuit, who actually demoted me, said to me, I believe in you. And
Mm.
I believe if you have it in your mind to get past this and not let this, like, not let this happen to you, but take hold of what your future could be, you'll be great here. And he, even after he left the company, it's amazing to see what he has done with his career. I think that has always stuck with me. I have many great folks that I knew at Capital One, my first job. Actually a very monogamous employee. I've only worked for two big companies. But those are some of the folks that I speak to on a regular basis now, as people who inspire me. So those two examples are great examples of people who you would say, well, that would be interesting to have a sponsor who is the person who actually, created a divot,
Mhm.
in your mobility or trajectory. One could look at it that way. And then, I will say Mark Notarianni is somebody who gave me not only the shot that I was talking about when I interviewed for a vice president role here at Intuit, but he has invested in me now as a peer as well.
Mhm.
And so I,
Mhm.
I think these are just great examples of where, he's not my manager. He did give me a shot, not really knowing me, but spending time with people who are outside your craft and who you ask to not only mentor you, but sponsor you is a really
Yeah.
critical part of the way that I've navigated my career the last 20 years.
It's such a gift too. I mean, what you're referring to is involves the level of asking for yourself. You said you've been very lucky or blessed to have so many great sponsors, but you created that. You create that through asking. They reciprocate as well, and they're the givers back. But there's something really powerful to be said about asking for what you want and being able to communicate that to other people as being, those continuation of our story around your secrets to success, finding those people.
Absolutely. I would say I'm still learning. I'm
Mm.
somebody who one might say, well, you're in a great job, you're in a great role, you've been very successful at Intuit, but it's a journey every day. And it's a reminder every day to speak up for yourself, to not suffer
Mhm.
in silence and start with constraints in terms of advocating for yourself. I really believe what you say when you say ask for what you want. That is
Mhm.
easier said than done. You can often get into a place where you feel like, well, I might be asking too much. I think particularly for women in leadership, because our natural tendency is to be nurturing some ways as parents, I'll just say,
Right.
it's very difficult to be adamant and unapologetic about what you need to be successful because it's not going to be the same recipe for everybody. And that was the case for me, that I had to be until I got clearer with myself on what it is that I want in my professional life and what I'm willing to do for it. It wouldn't be fair to ask somebody else to open up those doors for me.
Yeah. And, one of the other things that just occurred to me as you were describing some of these sponsors that you've had throughout your career is that they weren't just yes people, meaning they weren't like, oh, you're so great. I'm sure that we'll find something for you. They were like, no, you got to work on these couple of things. And this is going to be challenging. And I'm going to give you a shot, but with these parameters and with this timeline. Right. And so that actually allows, like, I could see that as being a very strong leadership trait to begin to emulate even for yourself, because it really allows you to remember it's not just about being kind to your employees and being like, oh, you got this, you're so strong, or whatever. It's about really challenging them to step into the leader that they need to be successful. Like, you can't keep your old habits and be as successful in the C suite. So, there are things you have to learn along the way.
I think if you don't know, like this is so cliche, but knowing is more than half the battle is of are you going big enough? Ever feel reticent or to ask or not know where you stand by asking, how am I going big enough to your director
Mhm.
or your sponsor? Then there is something wrong in that equation. And I think
Mm.
all must own our own development and ask for what
Mhm.
you want, but be very
Yeah.
clear about the expectations of what it takes to get there, so you know that you're not waiting and wondering or suffering in silence. That's some people's Achilles heel, and that was mine
Mhm.
for a while in my
Mhm.
early career.
That's so good. All right. So I like to ask all of my guests this, $1 million question, which is, why do you personally feel motivated to have a voice at the table?
This is very near and dear to me. I've had in the last 12 years, I've had 4 children, and I have 2 daughters who are 10 and 12. And as I've seen them grow up, I didn't realize until the pandemic and having been able to spend, 37 consecutive dinners with them after that, which had previously been, maybe a couple of times a week, how much their observation of me was shaping a bit of how they were starting to develop their own identities. And that is one observation I had during the pandemic, having spent time working remote from home and seeing the micro moments where they would come and have questions and not default to asking me, but to their dad. And then when seeing me in meetings or hearing me emulate me later on, what I would
Mhm.
be later in the
Mhm.
evening. And I realized like that's a personal example of how important it is that I
Mhm.
represent confidence and
Mhm.
what leadership really looks like and what standing up for yourself looks like, and particularly now as, uh, you know, there's so much out there influencing our kids today where they spend most of their time. The second is I started to do some fireside chats as I became more senior in the company with new employees at the company and leading one of our employee groups, Asian Pacific Network. And I remember very explicitly one employee that reached out to me who was really struggling with her career and recognized after hearing me about my story about where I grew up and some of the challenges I had speaking my own voice and feeling like my differences were actually an advantage, not being dilutive. And that person reached out to me, and I didn't realize how much I impacted and affected her mindset to actually turn her career around. She did end up leaving Intuit, but is now an incredible leader at one of our big competitors and doing extremely well.
Yeah.
She reached out to me and sent me a handwritten letter a few years ago about how much that conversation we had impacted her. I'm not saying that I did anything special or significant to change her life. What I'm saying is that I couldn't believe that she remembered some of the exact words that I had said that impacted me and how much it resonated with her because she went through the same thing. And I never want anyone, if I can do something to change somebody's mindset because of something that we experienced similarly that I didn't speak up about that could now create a more positive experience, I realize it's my responsibility to do that. So our voice needs to be a platform
Right.
and purpose driven, in my opinion. But when you have examples like that that are personal, that affect you like that, it really does shape how you think differently now in the future.
As we wrap up today, I'm curious if there's any other words of advice for a woman trying to advance her career. She's not sure. She feels stuck. She's not sure what to do next. Anything else that you'd like to share with her?
You know, one of the things I would say is that we've talked a lot about it today, but I really do believe that you have to figure out how to be unapologetic about what you want and being loud and proud about that.
Hmm.
And as I said today, it is not something that's been easy for me over time. And I've felt like my work should represent that. The impact I've made that facts are friendly should influence that. But in this role today and in corporate America and where we are, no longer is it really just about the work, but it's about how you are stepping up to advocate for yourself. And that's why I love your book so much, Stacey, and what you're helping your viewers and your listeners reinforce, both with their teams and themselves. But I think it's very important. So I would just underscore that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I know that your words today are going to be repeated by others. And your journey is incredibly inspiring and impactful, and it matters. So, thank you so much for sharing your voice with us today. Any ways that people can get in touch with you or follow you, or any sort of direction that you want to give our audience today, whether it's to you or Intuit or anything about the work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. You can follow me on LinkedIn and also message me. I'm always happy to connect and make connections, especially with others who are on the same journey and on the same path. We have communities that we're joining with other companies to actually make sure that women in product and women in leadership and in technology are connected. There really is no other more powerful way than to talk to others who are going through the same things that you are. So if any of this resonated with you all in terms of my journey, I'm more than happy to connect with you and make the connection.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah Kim, everyone, thank you for being here. And I really admire your leadership and your authenticity today. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey.
Nice to meet you, Stacy. Thank you.
Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time, so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today.